Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ericka.Herring, and I'm the director of the Statewide Training Initiative with Florida Legal Services. We're excited to have you join us today for the ABCs of Comprehensive Behavioral Health Assessments. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded, so you're going to receive a copy of this recording in an email from Zoom within about 24 hours. Will also be posted on YouTube as well, so be on the lookout. If you have subscribed to our channel, you should be able to get a notification, but you can also access it afterwards. So the training is approved by the Florida Bar with for two general CLE credits, for two mental health and wellness credits, and for two juvenile law certification credits. I'll announce the CLE code towards the end of the session. I'll drop it into the chat. That CLE code is also going to be included in the email that goes out from Zoom, and I will also include it in the YouTube description as well. So if you need a certificate of attendance for this webinar, please email me after the webinar is done. Usually what I do is I wait for all the emails to come in and I start hammering them out all at the same time. So I'll drop my email into the chat again just in case. So you can email me after the webinar if you need that certificate. Closed captions are enabled for anybody who needs them. So if you're having any issues with accessibility, feel free to let me know. The copy of the materials, including the slides and other materials that our speaker has shared, I'm going to drop the link into the chat. It's a shared folder, so you're going to be able to access all these materials. That link is also going to be included in the email from Zoom and in the YouTube description for YouTube. If you have any questions during the presentation, try to use the Q&A, the question and answer feature on Zoom. As those questions come in, our speakers will try to address them. If for whatever reason they're not addressed immediately, we will try to address them towards the end. So with that said, this training is being co-hosted by the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar, or PILS. So if you're not familiar with PILS, I'll do as I always do. I will include all the information for the Public Interest Law section. It's a pretty cool section with a lot of great work groups, including the Children's Rights Work Group, which is led by Robin.Rosenberg, who's the chair of that group and happens to be the deputy director for Florida's Children's First. So with that said, Robin, I'm going to pass it over to you so you can get us started. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So glad you've joined us for this really important topic on comprehensive behavioral health assessments. Florida's Children First is committed to improving the quality of advocacy and the outcomes for all kids in the child welfare system. And we also work with young adults who were formerly in care and homeless youth. We're training and supporting the people that are directly working with young people is a really big part of our work, and we're happy to share this information with you today. I am so excited that my colleague Ericka.Herring is here to do this presentation with you, and between Eric and I, we'll try to answer your questions as we go along, and I'm going to turn it over to her. Take it away, Ericka.
Thanks a lot, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our presentation, the ABCs of the CBHAs, right? Acronym soup, as we all know. Hold on, for some reason. There we go. All right, so just some background, really quick information. I've joined Florida Children's First earlier this year. I started my legal career as an Equal Justice Works Fellow, advocating, providing, holistic representation for foster kids, kids touching child welfare that had developmental disabilities. And we'll get a little bit into why that kind of worked really well with all of the CBHA work that I've done. I've done lots of other things, but at the end of the day, I'm extremely passionate about representing children, working with children, and working with children in child welfare and also homeless kids. And I'll let Robin introduce herself when she gets chatting in just a few seconds. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we're going to talk about CBHAs. What are we going to talk about, kind of the structure of it? So first, we're going to talk about why do we have CBHAs, and Robin's going to handle that because she can actually tell us why we have them today. We're also going to talk about the goal, right, of conducting them, and then we're going to get into the ins and outs, the guiding documents, the referral process, sort of how this all really plays out in working with children, mostly in dependency, but as you'll see, other children not part of child welfare can also get CBHAs. So completing them, reviewing them, implementing those recommendations, that's a huge, huge, huge part of this. Subsequent CBHAs as well, we'll also discuss that because kids can have more than one done, and there's some parameters around that, so we'll talk about that. So we'll have practice tips throughout the entire presentation, and we also have some poll questions. I cannot wait to hear and hear the responses to some of the questions that we posed. And just as a quick note, I know Jorge mentioned it briefly. How are we going to handle Q&As? I'm going to stop periodically and try to address questions. Robin will be jumping in on the chat, answering questions as well. So we'll kind of, we want this to be as interactive as possible. And so we will stop periodically, ask questions, and my goal is to learn, right? I'm sure there's someone out there attending this webinar that can teach me something about CBHAs that I did not already know. And so I'm excited about that. So here we go. Here's our first poll question. What's your experience with CBHAs? Have you seen one? Seen them but never done anything with them? Once in a while. I've used them once in a while in cases. I use them all the time. You know what the funny part is I can't vote. All right.
We have about 70% participation. So I'm going to close it out in three, two, one, and let's end the poll and share the results.
All right, so 39% of you use them all the time. Woohoo. 22% of you use them once in a while and never seen one. 22%. Wow, that's interesting. Interesting. All right, cool. That's very helpful. So we've got people with lots of different experience. All right, so turn it over to Robin and she'll take it from here.
Hey, everybody. So before Florida's Children First was created, there were several different folks that were working on children's advocacy. And our predecessor organization is something called the Children First Project, which was part of Nova Law School. And the Children First Project had many different types of advocacy. One of the things they did was class action litigation. And they filed a suit in 1990 against the Health and Rehabilitative Services Department of Florida. HRS was the mega agency that was subsequently split out, DJJ and DCF being two separate entities that came out of HRS. At the time, the lawsuit was filed against Governor Martinez, and it was, I think, probably the last massive class action lawsuit on child welfare in Florida. There have been subsequent smaller ones that were certified, but this, I think, was the last statewide lawsuit. So if you think about it, it was filed in 1990. I was at Holland and Knight in the early 2000s when the case was set to go to trial against Governor Bush. And my job was to help get the case ready for trial. A separate team negotiated with the Department of Children and Family in the governor's office. And instead of going to trial in federal court in Miami, we achieved settlement in 2001. The settlement class was all children in the legal or physical custody of the state, including those who are dependent and delinquent, who the state knows or should know have a need for mental health services. This was about children's mental health issues. Next slide, please. The ME, the child whose name is on this class action lawsuit, came into the custody of the state when he was 7 years old. He was found living in a car with his father, who had some substance issues. They were homeless, they were poor. He was separated from his siblings. He had more than 20 placements. He never received mental health treatment. I think when he was around 12, he stole potato chips because he was hungry. And that began his entry in crossing over into the delinquency system. He was released when he was 18, his first adult criminal charge at 21. I checked the other day, and I think there were 12 to 15 subsequent adult criminal charges. He had serious mental health needs that were never met. Next slide, please. So over the course of this very long lawsuit, lots of things changed in the state of Florida. And part of my job in getting ready the case for trial was looking at DCF's legislative budget requests. Year after year, there would be line items saying, we need this additional funding to provide these services because of the ME lawsuit. And the state went from funding children's mental health at $6 million in 1990 to over $100 million by 2001. The Medicaid spending on children's mental health also increased substantially over that course of time. And Medicaid in Florida was expanded to include very specific behavioral health services for children. That's where we got specialized therapeutic foster care, comprehensive behavioral health assessments, targeted case management. I'm sorry, the comprehensive assessments at that point over the course of time were not CBHAs, but the ability to fund comprehensive assessments took place in that time. And then for kids in juvenile justice, we got behavioral health overlay services. So all of those things were added to Florida's repertoire of services for children's mental health issues. Next slide. But at the time we were getting ready to go to trial, there were still substantial gaps in individual children getting the services that they need and getting services that match their needs. There were a lot of kids that got anger management. That was like the service du jour. Some of them probably needed anger management, but many of them probably needed other services. So the services weren't matching the needs, and all children were not being assessed to determine what they individually needed. Next slide, please. So in the lawsuit, instead of coming up with a consent decree and specific points or things that the state was required to do, both DCF and DJJ agreed to adopt a system of care principle. And their principle were when kids come into the system, we are going to screen or assess all children. So DJJ agreed to screen all children for mental health needs. DCF said, just by the very nature of why children come into state care, we're going to skip the screening and we're going to go straight to assessment. And that is when comprehensive behavioral health assessments were born. DCF agreed that the assessments would be conducted by licensed mental health professionals, and that from each of those individualized assessments, an individual case plan would be created and the services would be implemented within 30 days. And this concept of systems of care principles was actually embodied in Florida statutes and these guiding principles. It's not a statute that I've ever referred to in my work, but it's there, 394.491. Next slide, please.
All right, so here we go. Go for it, Robin.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just want to please feel free if you want to launch the poll, Jorge, to put your thoughts in. And I just want to cap it off by saying the concept behind this was the state should treat each child as an individual, determine what they really need, and offer those services based on the child's individual needs. It was an extraordinary amount of time spent by the state, a lot of legal fees spent by the state and by all of the agencies that came together on the plaintiff side to litigate cases. And in the aftermath of that, Florida's Children First was born, because 12-year class actions are not the most efficient way to get change, which is why we wanted to be more nimble and create Florida's Children First. So happy to share the history with you. And if anybody wants to learn more about it offline, and the ins and outs of settling that lawsuit were pretty interesting if you're a legal geek. But love to hear what you all think about the history. So, and I'm going to turn it back to Eric.
We have about 23 answers. They keep coming in, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll so we can share them. I don't think people are gonna be able to see them, but I'll read out a few of the answers. So let's end the poll, share the result, view details over here, and share results. I think you might all see that there were 29 answers, but on my end, I have here I'm gonna read the first answers that come in. It's wonderful, too much effort to get to where kids obviously need to be served basically. Interesting, a shame it took so long. We have great suit, very interesting and helpful to know. Helpful. Very sad to hear about these experiences. Hopeful the small movement will make a difference. They deserve better. it's helpful to know how it came about. Excellent. And it kind of goes on and on and on in the same topic. So I'll share all of these answers. I'll upload it to the materials so people can have access to them. All right. I'm going to stop sharing.
Awesome. That's fascinating. Thanks, Robin, for sharing that. That sounds about as long as a lawsuit would take with the state of Florida. All right. Here we go. All right. So, what are the goals of conducting CBHAs, right? So, a lot of it is, and I'm not going to read the whole slide, right? It's providing assessment of areas where no other information exists, update pertinent information, right? We're going to talk about recommendations. I think of it as like someone who's coming in and synthesizing all of the data, right? So, they're going to ask for lots of records, they're going to interview lots of people, and the goal is to synthesize all of the data, put it in one document, and truly provide recommendations for this particular child, as Robin mentioned. And here we go. CPHAs in and outs. I should warn you now, all of my pictures of my sweet children are all mostly happy, smiling, because I am an optimist and I always see the glass as half full. So I'm warning you now on that. All right, so let's first talk about the guiding documents. What I think is really interesting as I was trying to put this presentation together, because I knew about them, but I hadn't looked at them in a while. And when you get the presentation, you should be able to click directly on the links. And I won't do that now because if I do, my technology will fail, I'm pretty sure. But the operating procedure, right? So this is the department's operating procedure. It really just talks about the actual process to getting the CBHAs, the referral, all that kind of good stuff. It's really like a 5-page document. Or it's not, it's a 35-page document, but in terms of in terms of CBHAs, it's 5 pages. And then we've got the Florida Admin Code, and that's 1 page, ladies and gentlemen, just one full page. And then the Medicaid Handbook, which we're going to talk about that at some point, maybe, maybe not, but it is not in the Community Behavioral Health Services coverage and limitations. And the reason why I say that is because it is referenced in the operating procedure as the Medicaid Handbook that governs CBHAs. But there have been some changes, and obviously I guess some things just haven't caught up, just changing the different handbooks. So I just want to make sure this is the actual handbook that discusses CBHAs, not the Community Behavioral Health Services, which is where I started to look because that's what I remembered it being under. All right, so who gets a CBHA? So all children in out-of-home care between 0 to 17, or, right, so those are children in dependency, or children who have committed acts of delinquency, have an emotional disturbance, or at risk for placement in a residential setting. So have the little note I have on the bottom. So if a child is placed with a parent, okay, at shelter, right? The child is removed from one parent but placed with another, that child will not typically get a CBHA. Now, interestingly enough, the redacted CBHA that I share with you as part of our materials, the child was at shelter placed with a friend of the family, and then I would say within 48 hours placed with the father. Well, that child did end up getting the CBHA because the referral was submitted prior to the child moving with the parent. So you may occasionally see a CBHA for a child who is with a parent, but was not at the time of shelter. All right, and what does that actual referral process looks like? So within 7 calendar days of the child being placed in a shelter, so being removed, they'll be referred for a CBHA. And typically I have seen the CPI submit the referral. And then, and we'll talk about a transfer staffing, that I see that's where I start to ask questions, right, at the transfer staffing. But if it's not the CPI that does it, the case manager will submit the form to who they call the point of contact. So every CBC has a point of contact that receives this document. And then within 1 business day of a completed form, they'll send it to an approved provider. All right, so what's the actual timeline for completing a CBHAs, right? So the CBHA provider has 24 calendar days after getting the authorization to complete the assessment and send the report. Once they complete the report, they're going to send it back to the point of contact. They'll review it, for quality and completeness. And if it's acceptable, then they'll forward it to the lead agency. And if not, they'll send it back to the CBHA assessor and say, hey, did you notice this? Did you notice that? Now, I will say it may still have some errors if you've ever reviewed a CBHA. In fact, the one that the redacted one that I provided you in the handouts, at one point it refers to a child being 11 months old, and then it refers to the child being 11 years old, which is a huge difference. And they're talking about the same kid. So just keep in mind that it doesn't mean it will be free of errors, but it's got to have all of the appropriate sections. Ooh, here we have another poll question. How often do you timely receive the CBHA for children you work with? And here's what I want to say about this. So I recently had a youth that I'm her attorney, and she was sheltered, and I started asking questions about the CBHA, and nobody knew where the CBHA assessor was or who it was. And then I have to tell you, the week that the CBHA was due, funny enough, the assessor shows up at court for the arraignment, then starts trying to get all the work done. I mean, they were rushing to get it done. And they did, but we're going to talk about why I have a big issue with that sort of like last minute rushness. But let's see now. Let's see, Jorge,
Okay,
if we're ready.
hang on one second. There's a question that came in on the Q&A. For
Oh,
children placed with non-offending parents at shelter, would a CBH referral be completed then?
I have not seen them done that way. I have not. If they are placed with a parent at shelter, I have not seen CPHA referrals come in, and typically I have seen Medicaid deny that. However, like I said, in the one instance I had recently, I was surprised to see a CBHA, but then I realized that it was like 48 hours after the child came in was when they were placed with the parent because they were waiting on the home study. So if it's at shelter, goes straight to a parent, I have not seen CPHA referrals approved.
Thank you.
All right. No, thank you. All right, Jorge, if you want to tell us, I'm excited to see how often we get
Yeah,
them timely.
yeah, we have
And
about 40% participation, so I'm
oh, I
gonna
got you.
end it in three, two, one, and then poll. Okay, share results.
All right, so 52% say they're handled timely. All right, awesome. 24% said never, 22% said frequently, and 2% said always. All right, interesting. That is really interesting because I have found that if I'm calendaring it and I ask for it, I will get it. But I most of the time it's like I have to ask for it. So, which is not super fun. All right. Oh, here we go. Practice tips. So we've got these scattered throughout the presentation. So at shelter, we ask for the court to order the CBHA and then confirm at that transfer staffing, which usually happens within 7 days, that the referral was submitted. Because I have seen where we have like a new CPI, a new case manager, and they're like, well, CPI was supposed to do it. CPI was like, oh, I didn't think I was supposed to do it. So it's just that transfer staffing. That's one of the first questions I've asked. I also have been asked, well, why are you asking for it at shelter? It should be done automatically. This is true. It should, but I have seen times when it just slips through the cracks, like somebody just forgets. I would keep tabs on when the CBHA is due, and I will calendar it. And like I said, I've requested them. I'll be like, all right, today's day 25. I'll give them till day 26, and then I start sending emails like, hey, where's the CBHA? And 9 out of 10 times they're like, oh, here you go. And I'm just getting it via email. So it's not filed in court just yet, but I am able to ask for it. And also, CBHAs don't always make it into the hands of everyone. So just keep that in mind is, take a look at who's gotten it, who's not gotten it, who could benefit from it. And we're also later on this presentation, talk about who should not be getting it because I have that little tip as well. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the credentials for the CBHA assessors. And these are just a long list of the licensed providers, keynote licensed providers who can handle CBHAs. And as you can see, it's a pretty long list. I typically see mental health counselors handle it or clinical social workers, but again, here's a whole list of who can handle them. But wait, there's more. So whoever handles the CBHA assessment, must have 2 years of direct full-time experience working with children and families who are victims of abuse, sexual abuse or neglect, even delinquent. Or they can also they can be a master's level practitioner working under a licensed practitioner who has, the 5 years of full-time experience, direct services with this population, and also a master's degree in all these different fields. So, and here we go. And this is actually my favorite question of all, friends, just so you know. Can you guess what the fee for a reimbursement for a CBHA is? Because this one completely blew my mind when I researched it.
Answers are coming in fast, so we have like
Oh, I'm
over
excited.
40 already.
I cannot tell you all. I am actually really excited about this one because I kind of did like a double take, like when I first found this out many, many moons ago.
All right, so we're almost at 60. They slowed down a little bit, so I'm gonna close out the poll so we can look at the answers in three, two, one, and ending the poll. Let me
All right.
click on the details, and I'm going to share the results, but I'll still read them out loud. Okay. So we have $1,000, we have zero, we have 500, 250, 150, we have 50 question mark. We have 75, 650, 50, 250, 450, 275. I have no idea. 150. So
All right.
250 seems like a popular one, but I think the highest one that I saw
250.
was 1,000. So Erica, what's the answer?
So I'm going to tell you, my friend who got 1,000, you are the closest one because it is $977 for a CBHA, which I think is astounding considering if we want to compare that a whole day, okay, of specialized therapeutic foster care level one, the entire day is a reimbursement of $88.03. But a CBHA is $977. So that's 11 days, 11 days of therapeutic, specialized therapeutic foster care level one. And I think that's important to know. Like that should tell you the importance of this assessment. The fact that Medicaid will pay $977 for a total of 20 hours. So it's a max of 20 hours. I have never seen a CPHA, by the way, where the assessor says it took them less than 20 hours. They always go to the max, and that's the max reimbursement of 977. So I just think that's fascinating because again, like when I look into like speech therapy is like $15. I think like $15 half an hour or even an hour. Comparing it to that, I just think that should tell you that how incredibly important it is to have these assessments done. Um, to the point that Medicaid would pay almost $1,000. So whoever the $1,000 person is, kudos to you because I figured people would think about maybe 250, maybe 300. So good call. Good call. I could. There we go. All right, so let's talk now about completing CBHAs. All right, so first things first, okay? They have to include direct observation of the child or youth in all of these different settings, right? A home, school or childcare, right? Depending on the age of the child. The work site, if it's a young, a teenager who has a job, or the community. Now, note, I thought this was really interesting that they have to be conducted face to face, right? It can't be done via telemedicine. So I thought that was really interesting because I don't remember that being in the handbook before. But things have changed a lot. And I know that there's a lot of mental health services and appointments that are allowed to be via telemedicine. So um, I guess it's probably why they put that in here was just to say, hey, by the way, for this particular assessment, and again, it probably goes back to the service, right? The fee that they're paying for it. We want the observation to be in person. All right, so here's a good practice tip. And we'll also stop for questions in just a second. So ensure that the CBHA assessor has any and all records to ensure it's a quality one, right? Garbage in, garbage out, friends. Here's my quick example. So going back to the CBHA I just had completed a couple of weeks ago for one of my new clients. We're at the courthouse. The CBHA is due Friday. This is Tuesday. Um, so that day before is the first time that like the CBHA assessor has popped up. And I see the CBHA assessor at court and she says to me Tuesday afternoon, I don't have any records for this child. Is there anything that you can provide to me? Because I don't have anything. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how are you going to complete, right, the CBHA if you don't have anything? And they were in luck. I did have records, and my client did allow me to release those records. But again, garbage in, garbage out. So who is communicating with that CBHA assessor? Who is providing them what documentation? Let's make sure that they actually have the information because otherwise you're not going to get a quality referral. So I didn't know if we had any questions that I can answer.
Um, there was a question about who is monitoring the completion of the CBHAs or monitoring CBHAs generally. And my answer was I think it's partially done by at least the completion is tracked in DCF monitoring. But if anybody who's on the webinar has more detailed information about the monitoring, please share that in the chat. And there's a question, what are the sanctions for not timely completing and providing the CBHA?
I would gather I don't know of any. I
Yeah.
mean, I assume if it's not completed, right, the CBHA assessor doesn't get paid. So I hate to say this, but I assume their incentive to complete it is it's the only way they're going to receive payment. Because when you look at a CPHA, interestingly enough, like you'll see they will detail their time, like how much time they spent doing this, how much they time spending that to justify the 20 hours. But I don't believe that there are any sanctions for them not being completed because I haven't frankly seen one that's completely just disregarded and ignored. I've seen it where the referral's not sent, and that's not the CBHA assessor's fault, right? Because they don't know, they don't have the referral. But I haven't seen it where the assessor gets the referral and like disappears off the face of the planet. I have not seen that. So if you've encountered that, let me know separately because I would love to learn more about that. But as far as I know, I don't believe that there is a sanction. I just believe if you don't complete the CBHA, the assessor will not get paid, if that
Um,
makes sense.
and the CBCs are required to have a contact person who stays on top of that. So,
Correct.
um,
And that's the only thing I can think of, not in terms of sanctions, correct, Robin, is I would think the point of contact is tracking them, right? Like they have it on some sort of a spreadsheet, like this is the day that they're due, just like I did when I was a staff attorney, where I started my EJW project, right? Like I kept track of them. I knew when they were all supposed to come in and I kept track of them that way. So I do believe the point of contact has it, has some sort of tracking system, whatever that might be.
right.
Any other questions?
Yep, there's a bunch. Are there enough
Oh.
well-qualified evaluators in the various regions willing to do them and able to do them timely? And I think we have not heard of any region that didn't have that. I can say at the outset when CBHAs were first created, there was a big struggle around the state to have sufficient providers, but um, I don't know if Erica, if you've heard of any concerns. I have not.
I have not, although I will note that the case that I currently have in Circuit 18, that assessor came from Tampa, and I thought that was interesting. I thought to myself, are there none like closer? So I did think that that was interesting, but I have not heard across the state of there being issues with of having assessors.
Right. Melissa asked about the qualifications. That slide is in the materials that provides that
It
information.
is.
Um,
It is.
there's a question about why the information in the CBHA is redundant with a lot of cut and paste. I'm not sure that's a question Erica can answer.
Oh, I
You could try.
understand. I do understand what you mean, and it is interesting because you'll see like the summary will have a lot of the same cut and paste from the information gathering. Again, I think I truly believe, when you go into the CPHA, when they tell you the Medicaid handbook will tell you exactly what sections they need to fill out. It tells them exactly what information needs to be in there. So I do believe that it can be redundant, but I think that's why they're doing it because the handbook says, for this section, address this, for this section, address this.
And then there's a question about is it appropriate for assessors to conduct their assessments via telehealth? We have several that still do.
Oh, I don't believe they're supposed to, based on what I read in the Medicaid
Well,
handbook.
at least the child observations have to be
Yes.
face to face. There could be other aspects of it that they do remotely, but
Oh, oh, that's a good point, Robin. I could see that where like the interviews with the parents or the caregivers or I mean now obviously if they're observing the child at the child care at the daycare, they're going to talk to the folks while they're there. But I could see that talking to parents via telemedicine or other people. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. So yeah, the direct observation of the child has to be in person, but they probably are interviewing other people. For this last one that I just did, I happened to be at the courthouse in person, and so we had a conversation in person, but I have spoken on the phone with CBHA assessors versus being in person.
and then there's another question. In addition to the fee paid to the assessor, how much can the CBC bill for the service?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that they bill for it, if that makes sense. I don't know enough about that. I could do some research. If the person wants to, if you want to reach out to us, let us know. I could do some research, but that
I don't
hadn't
think, again, it's a
occurred to
Medicaid
me.
service. The Medicaid pays the
Yeah.
Medicaid fee. So as far as I know,
Yeah, I
again,
don't think CBC gets anything for this.
yeah.
Any others, or
No, that was
we're good
good.
to?
Good slew.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. 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 All right. So here's where we get to the nitty gritty. Okay. And so here's where you might see some of the redundancies that we just talked about, right? So identifying information or the reason for the referral, personal and family history, placement history, sources of information. So these are all the different components, and we have another slide with with another set of components, and these are all for children under 6, right? So what you're really going to see the big difference here is for children under 6, it's going to say mother's history is extremely important. Hold on, I've got it here. Including depression screening is important. So that's like something that you're not going to see on a CBHA for children older than 6. So here is some of them. And here we go, even more requirements, right? Resources, including income benefits, educational analysis, cultural analysis, situational. I love to see the little kids love to cook. Activities catalog, including what the recipient enjoys, right? What do they like to do in their free time? And then it also tells you specifically the type of assessment, right? The CANs, the appropriate one based for the age of the kids under 6. Now, comparing this to CBHAs for children 6 through 20. So I highlighted on my notes, right? The interviews and interventions, they're handled differently than how they are for kids under 6. Cognitive functioning and screening is done for kids 6 to 20. They do it differently for children under 6, right? So basically, the difference between the two is just a different type of review, a different type of, synthesizing data because the kids are older, the kids are in school. You're going to have more of that. And here we go, same thing here, right? So the big difference here for on this slide, interestingly, I thought was a good one, reaction or pattern of reaction to any previous out-of-home placements. I thought that was really interesting, right? Like Robin said, right? We could have kids who have had lots of placements. Although I will say, when the CBHA is happening, the kids are typically, they've just been in care, so they haven't had hopefully too much placement disruption. But I think obviously it will depend. But I thought that was a really interesting one. I think that would be really important for a subsequent CPHA, is where I would see that being extremely important. And then here for, activities that the child includes, see this time I included music because I love music. So here we are. Also kind of different here, vocational aptitude and interest evaluation or previous employer if the child is over 20 or the youth is over 20. So again, just to show you a little bit of the differences. So in your handouts, I included a CBHA for 2 kids. The kids are siblings, and I thought it would be the best one to share with you because there is one, the first sibling is 11 months old, the other sibling is 10 years old. So you're going to kind of get to see, although it is redacted, of course, it's not too bad, it's still readable, but you'll be able to see sort of the differences and kind of how they approach it based on the age of the children. But all CBHAs will have the following. They will have the problem presentation and symptoms, risk behaviors, functioning, family and caregiver needs and strengths, and the recipient strengths. And then it will end with what we call the summary of findings and recommendations. So all of them will have at least this. The difference in the other two will just be depending on the child's age. All right, so here we go. I wanted to show you, hopefully you can see this, kind of just a reason for referral, right? So this just tells you, this is just one page of the redacted one that I included for you. It talks about, why the CBHA is being handled, what they're going to look into, how the child came into care, that sort of thing. So here's one of the pages, just the reason for referral. And this one is for, this is for the 11-month-old. And so here's what I wanted to show you. Here's something really interesting. So here are his problems. They tell you right at the top, problems, recommendations, and then it says recommendations. He may benefit from consistency and stability in his routine and be in an environment free from illegal activity or substance abuse. Okay. And then it says also he may benefit from visitation with his maternal half brother on a routine basis. So there you go. That's one recommendation. Sibling visits, which we all know are incredibly important. And then the last one is may benefit from having his circumcision completed at Nemours if desired by the father. So here you go. These are recommendations. This is the 11-month-old. You'll read it in the redacted version, but generally he's fine. He's 11 months old. He's doing well. Doesn't really have, developmentally on track, that sort of thing. So these recommendations made a lot of sense for me when I read them for him. Versus now we're going to read recommendations for his 10-year-old sibling. And here you go. It says, may benefit from supportive counseling to address past traumatic events. May benefit from mentoring is his second one. He has a history of speech therapy, making sure he's continuing to get speech therapy at his new school. Maybe benefit from academic IEP assessment, updating that. May benefit from a physical, so he, needs to have a physical done. He needs to have a dental exam done. And it also says that he should have an evaluation for autism, because when he came into care, um, he uh, the court was told, or the paperwork, the department said that he had autism. And so that's something that, once you look at the redacted version, you'll see that they actually didn't think that he had autism. And I don't disagree with them, but because he came in with that diagnosis, that's why they're saying, oh, he might benefit from an assessment that that he has autism. All right, so let's go. Got another poll question. Are the CBHAs that you receive complete and thorough? And I guess this is right. Like, do you think that they're complete and thorough? Because sometimes they are really thorough and I learn a lot. And sometimes I think like, hmm, I think you missed a lot of stuff here. So I'm curious to see
While
if
people are,
folks,
uh, did you launch it, Jorge?
oh, sorry.
I'm about to share.
Okay.
Oh,
In the meantime, Erica, there's a question. What documents should the assessors get before they start the assessment?
before they start the assessment.
Yeah.
So I get right. It's going to be really case specific. So I'll give you the example of the youth that I'm working with. The youth that I'm working with came from a private placement group home. So in that particular instance, those group home records were really important for the CBHA assessor to see, like, okay, why are we where we are today? So I think it depends. I mean, they look at a lot of things like criminal records, which is all public record for the most part, right? They'll pull criminal records for the parents. If the child has special education needs, hopefully when the child was sheltered, the department found their IEP and their school records. So those are the kind of records, just any records that you may have for the child. I think it just depends. I hate to say that, attorney answer, but I liked having those group home records reviewed and having the CBHA assessor take a look at them, because otherwise it was just interviewing, the mom and the dad who, have their own views of, why the child came into care. And so that those are the types of records that I would provide. I would provide, prior school records. If the child's been in care before, they usually have a file. Like this particular child did not, but the 10-year-old CBHA that I shared with you, the redacted one, he's been in care before. So that CBHA assessor had access to a lot of those records. So it just depends. But I hope that's helpful.
Right, so we have 53 answers. I'm going to I'm going to end the poll in three, two,
Let's see.
one, and let's share the results.
Ooh, so 56% of you said that they're sometimes complete and accurate, and then 37% of you said frequently, always was 0%. And then never was 7%. So interesting that um is sort of what I expected. Okay, just making sure we're good on time. All right, so who gets access to a completed CBHA? Essentially, it's anybody that has access to the pleadings, right? So children have access to them, parents and their attorneys, case managers, CLS attorneys, guardian ad litem, and I also included the guardian ad litem attorney because it's a multi-pronged team, attorneys, AALs. But again, anybody who has access to it. I will say that because it has a lot of, a lot of information, right, condensed on this one 35-page document. The client of mine who recently had it completed, the case manager reached out to me and said, oh, I want to send it to her. And I said, absolutely. But I will say personally myself, I read it first. And I did give her a call and just kind of gave her a heads up. It might have some difficult content in there. So I'm not saying we should not send them to children. We should absolutely send them to children. But I will say that I read it first so that I knew what it said, so that in case my client had any questions, we could talk about it. And I also kind of gave them a heads up. Hey, it may be hard to read. It may have some information that may be difficult. So just make sure you have time, space, um, that it's going to be as beneficial to you as possible. So that's who gets access to it. And now is the flip side, friends. Who should not have access to it? So here is I guess one of my big pet peeves. So I've done a lot of work working with children who, we've submitted applications for the agency for persons with disabilities. And at one point, people were submitting CBHAs to the assessors to say, look, you see, the CBHA assessor says the child has autism, the child has an intellectual disability, like you guys have to make them eligible. But instead, what would happen is the agency would take that lovely CBHA and say, actually, this child does not have a disability. This child is clearly having, issues, due to their environment. Look at their parent, look at what their parent did. And so um, I made sure, let me put it that way, that we stopped sending CBHAs to the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, right? It doesn't have any kind of testing that they take. It's not evaluative in terms of what they need. They're looking for school records, they're looking for other stuff, and I could spend hours and ages talking about that. But please do not send CBHAs. And I wouldn't even send them to the schools either. I think it has a lot of information that isn't necessarily relevant. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't have any information that could be helpful in terms of educating the child, but I think it would just be upon us, at the right time if it was appropriate to share that piece of information, like, oh, did you know that the child's moved schools this many times or something like that from the CBHA? But I would not ever send a CBHA to schools, and I certainly would never send it to the Agency for Persons with Disabilities. And that is my one big, huge pet peeve about CBHAs because I hated to see the agency say that the child really didn't have this disability and it was just because of how they grew up. And I thought that was really unfortunate. So that's my one big, really huge pet peeve. All right, so what are you looking for? Recommendations, 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 right? And I showed them to you. Again, they can be different. They can be one or two, they can be 10, depending on the situation. And so review any information or interviews that were completed. Any relatives or friends you weren't aware of. And the reason why I talk about this is I was reading a CBHA recently and I thought, oh, who's that? Who's that sibling? Who's that sibling? Is that sibling a placement option? Is that like who is that? And I'm always surprised at the amount of people that the CBHA assessor lists that I've never heard of. And I'm like, huh. So I think that's really important information about the child's development. There'll be like a section about when they, met their developmental milestones, if they were on target or not. It will give him background information about the parents or caregivers. So remember when I said to you, I called my client and said, hey, this might be difficult to read. A lot of it had to do with the background information, about a parent. Or a caregiver in that instance. And is something not making sense? Ask questions. And, like, again, that one where I got where it said that the kid was 11 years old, but he was really 11 months old. Like, I knew that was not something I needed to ask about. That was a Scrivener's error. But I have gotten CBHAs where I was like, I think this is not about this particular sibling. This sounds like the other sibling. And so it's important to ask questions, and I would encourage you to ask questions. Um,
Erica, I'm going to pause you right. Oh, well, go ahead with your practice tip and then we can.
no, I was going to say ask me questions, but if there's something you want to chime in on, Robin, go for it.
No, do the practice tips and then I'll read
Okay.
some questions that have been coming in.
Perfect. So I would say read the narrative carefully, including, important recommendations might be there versus in the actual recommendations. Because again, we talked about the redundancy, like it may be something, I hate to say they forgot to copy and paste or they just forgot to put in there. So please read the narrative carefully and do not rely solely on the items in the summary of recommendations. Again, they could be anywhere. There could be like a little bit of a nugget somewhere that they didn't put at the end. That doesn't mean it's not important. Ask for the CBHA to be filed with the court. I cannot stress this enough. I have seen CBHAs come in, review them, good to go. Months go by, no one's filed them with the court. Well, how are we asking the court to follow all recommendations, to file an order for all recommendations to be followed if it's not been filed in the court file. So, interestingly enough, I'm starting to see them in my local circuit getting filed a lot more quickly. That was not always the case. I used to have to ask for it to be filed with the court, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but I imagine it's different across the state. But please, please, please make sure that it's filed with the court and also ask for the court to order all recommendations to be followed. All right, what's going on, Miss Robin, with
Okay.
questions or?
Well, first I want to say to the first practice tip, I specifically had a CBHA assessor tell me that they were advised not to put anything in the recommendations that would be work for a case manager to do. So she's the one who told me, look at the narrative because I'm not allowed to put certain things in the recommendation. So always very careful about that. So you have several questions about the sharing of the CBHA. The
Okay.
first one is, at what point do you think a CBHA should be given to a prospective adoptive parent?
All right, Robin, you can chime in and help me in on this one, but I think it's supposed to be provided as part of the record when the family is making the determination.
Yeah, and that same questioner is also said that sometimes they're, well, never, the CBHAs, if they had inaccurate information the first time, it doesn't get corrected, and then folks get the inaccurate information. So, and that is a problem. CBHAs are not routine, they're not corrected. Um, there's a question, what about sharing CBHAs with the insurance agencies, Humana, Sunshine, CMS?
I would not. I just had like that, like kind of like that reaction. I mean, I guess the question is for what purpose? Is it because the child's in need of a targeted case manager and they need to read certain portions in order to like get to know the child? I guess I would want to know more about why, but I would not personally, I would not share them with, I would not. That's just my kind of gut. But I guess again, it does depend on what you know, what the purpose is. Like, why are we doing that? I just think it has so much information and it has so much information about the parents and like there's a lot of information in there about the child, but I think there's also information about other people. And so that's why I'm hesitant, but I'm trying to think of like why I would maybe share a recommendation page if I thought it was pertinent. Like, hey, look, this has been recommended by the CBHA. And maybe I would include like a piece of that section, but I would be extremely reluctant to share the whole CBHA in those instances.
Okay, next question. How would anyone have the authority to share outside of people in court since it's a confidential document?
Well, I would say my kid, the client, if they wanted to share it with a bunch of folks, I mean, it's their document. I am assuming, I mean, they can, but no, I would think it needs to be as restrictive as possible. But there are plenty of people who do share it with other agencies because we do have that, and I'm gonna mess it up. It's 39 point, I think it's 0014. I could be wrong. That does allow you to share information with other agencies like the school system, Agency for Persons with Disabilities. Like there is that provision. But I will argue that that doesn't mean you have to share everything, right? It's just sharing pertinent information that you may need to share for the child. But I could see, it's funny, I didn't think to ask my client if she sent it to anybody else, but I have to say, depending on the teenager, I could totally see them doing that.
So
Although I
the
would advise against it.
follow-up question was, do you ask your client to get their permission before sharing?
I did. I have. My personal practice has been that I have asked my client, if I could share it. And I would explain the purpose. But I actually, now that I think about it, I don't think I've had a need to do that recently. But I would absolutely ask my client. I would say, this is the purpose, here's why. So for that particular case of mine where the CBHA assessor showed up at court because she had 3 days to complete it, um, I got specific permission from my client to release the records I'd gotten on her behalf to the CBHA assessor, and we had a discussion about it. So yeah, absolutely, I would talk to her first. Him or her, sorry.
And then we have a bunch of questions related to what happens when it's wrong. So one question says, who do you go to if it's not got accurate information? Um, have you ever seen an assessor correct after you've pointed out errors? And if the party finds the information is false, is there legal recourse? So they're kind of all the same.
I have not. I probably would go to back to the case manager, have them send it to the point of contact, and I would start my inquiry that way, if that makes sense. I have not seen any legal action taken about on them being inaccurate. And I will say, I think initially when we get these, or this is my how I've handled it, or what's happened to me. I think initially when I get this, I believe it, right? Because I don't know a whole lot about the case yet, right? We're 24 days into the case. I know some of what's going on, but I don't necessarily know, right? I don't know where the parents were born and how they grew up. So I will say that unless a parent says to me, hey, this whole section's wrong, I don't even know where they got this. I don't know that I would personally know that information. But I don't know of any legal action that could be taken. I would say that's something I think I would love to kind of research and think about. Because I haven't seen one that's been so flagrantly like wrong that I've had to call the assessor up. And I would have probably also called the assessor up and say, like, why is this completely wrong? Or where did you get this information? But that's something I think I'll research. Robin, if you know who posted that, I guess I could
I
look
don't.
also.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Okay,
And I
gotcha. All right. Well, then if you want to email me, I'd love to look into it a little more because those are the kinds of things that I think that's really interesting point. Um,
I think that's it for questions now. They're great. You guys are great, putting in great
oh,
stuff.
awesome. Yes. Yes. All right, great. Just checking time, make sure. All right, so here's something that I learned a couple of weeks ago. So I told you all I had this really rushed CBHA, and I say rushed. I'll tell you why I think it was rushed. And we'll talk about it in a second. Well, I told you why I think it's rushed, but I'll tell you what I think the result of that was. And then I get an email saying, are you free tomorrow for a 10-minute staffing, a CBHA staffing? And I'm like, what's this? So I have now learned that there are CBHA staffings, and I am curious, and we're going to have a poll question on this, on whether it's happening across the state or not. So CBHA staffings, all parties are invited, where the whole purpose of the meeting is just to review the CBHA recommendations. So they're reviewed, and it's sort of like kind of like I want to say a checklist, that's not right. But next steps are assigned to the appropriate people. Like I said, mine was supposed to be 10 minutes. It ended up being 15. We probably had about 10, maybe 12 parties on the staffing. And so for that particular CBHA staffing, the child had 3 recommendations. I was actually assigned to one of them because I had already started working on that particular recommendation, excuse me, before we even got the CBHA. But I've never seen this before, so I'm really curious. For our next poll question, have you attended a CBHA staffing? Because again, in fact, I even I reached out to someone I knew in the local circuit, and I was like, "Is this new?" And they had said that it was something that had been happening for a long time, but like internally. In other words, something that the agency was doing, but nothing that all parties had been invited to. So I was surprised. Oh, and by the way, I also made sure that the youth was present for it because it's about her. So, anyways, I just kind of sprung it on me less than 24 hours before it happened, but it was fascinating to attend.
All right, so we're at about 50% participation for the poll. Let's give everybody a few more seconds. And by the way, Erica, spoiler alert, I see 0 yeses so far, so this is
Oh
an
my
interesting
gosh.
result.
So maybe my circuit was behind. I can't believe this. I wish I had put in like a question, a follow-up that went like, when did this start? If someone wants to put it in the chat, I'd love to look at it later. But I was completely shocked. I was
All
like,
right.
oh,
I was
this is new.
hoping and waiting for one yes, and I don't see one, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll with the results that we have, and let's share the results.
Holy smokes. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you all were saying that sorry, Jorge, I misunderstood you. I thought it was that everybody had heard of these. So, okay, so then maybe this is a new thing and maybe we should start, like, I should start asking some questions across the state because again, this was like maybe 2 weeks ago and I thought, well, this is new. And I mean, it was a good opportunity, right? We went through all the recommendations, who's doing what. I'll tell you in that particular recommendation, the one that was assigned to me was the youth was transferring from one county to another and she had an IEP. And so I had already initiated the process to start a transfer IEP meeting. And that was one of the recommendations that the CBHA assessor had. So, wow, not one person said yes. So, yeah, I guess this might be maybe a circuit specific thing, but maybe we should find out if they can be held across the state. Hold on, I'm making a note. All right, so the verbiage of, what's supposed to happen with the implementation of recommendations. So the recommendations are supposed to be used to help develop the case plan. Now I'm going to tell you. that I usually see it in the opposite. I see the case plan conference, occurring and the case plan being developed, and then the CBHA comes out, and I have not personally seen it um, being changed or revised, but I'm understanding now that they should be. And so I am going to be implementing this in my practice, going forward, because I was not aware that the case plan should have been revised, but it totally makes sense. Now I've seen, right, the CBHA recommendations come in, we get them court ordered, all of the recommendations have to be followed. But it would make sense that they would be part of developing the case plan. I guess in my mind, the reason why it never occurred to me was because they're coming in my practice from years before, they were coming in after the case plan was completed. And I did want to complete my little story about that CBHA where the assessor, made her first point of contact the 4 business days. So on Monday, and the CBHA was due Friday. And the first we heard of her was Monday, and then she shows up in court on Tuesday. She spends time with the child on Wednesday, files the CPHA on Friday, and do you know that her CPHA recommendations, which I didn't think they were inappropriate, they made sense. I thought it was interesting that she said that she felt like the CBHA assessment time was not enough to actually give full recommendations because she thought that this was a very complex matter. And I think that's interesting, but I will know, perhaps if we had not waited week that it was due, perhaps we wouldn't have had that that notation in there. But anyhow, so this is how we should be implementing recommendations for CBHAs. And then once I finish this practice tip, Robin, we can see if there are any more questions. Okay, note that not all recommendations mean it's a guaranteed service. So let me give you the example, right? Because if you've seen the CBHAs when they come in, there's typically on the last page, they'll say like, application for Social Security, application for agency for persons with disabilities, all that kind of good stuff. Just because they say that an application should be filed, I have to tell you, does not necessarily mean that one should be filed. I think what it really means is we need to pull documentation to see if the child is eligible, right? Is the child eligible for services from the Agency for Persons with Disabilities? Should we be filing a Social Security application for SSI for the child? So I did want to put that out there that just because it's recommended, oh, the CBHA assessor says the kid qualifies for APD, that doesn't actually mean that the child actually does. So I just wanted to point that out. And then the other thing I really wanted to point out here is under EPSDT, and I'm not going to say the whole thing. Remember that if something is recommended in the CBHA under EPSDT, services that are medically necessary to correct or ameliorate a defect, condition, or physical or mental illness for recipients, excuse me, under age 21. This means, friends, there are no service limits. So just remember, if there's a recommendation in there, and the recommendation says, um, you know, Susie should be getting speech therapy 5 times a week. So what do you do with that recommendation? Oh, hold on, I'm trying to see. I'm not going to talk about that. So we'll talk about it here. So let's say the recommendation says that Susie should be getting speech therapy 5 times a week. I've not normally seen it that way. They'll normally just say, oh, this child may qualify for speech therapy. So you'll take that, right? Go to the PCP, get the prescription from the PCP that says it's medically necessary for the child to have speech therapy, and you find a speech therapist, you provide it to them, and they create the service plan for the child. There should not be a service limit for that. So if the child needs therapy 5 times a week for 30 minutes under EPSDT, there should not be that limit. So just keep that in mind that for children under 21, we don't have service limits. And the reason why I bring that up is just because this is my big EPSDT pitch for making sure that when we have those recommendations, right? Because again, Medicaid is paying a lot of money to get this evaluation done, to get this assessment done, to help this particular child. So let's go ahead and then take it and then use EPSDT to get the child all of the services that they're entitled to help ameliorate what it was that the assessor said was a recommendation. Oh, wait, I did not mean to do that. Hold on.
And
Okay.
ju-
Do you want to
just
chime in with questions, Robin?
just as a reminder, we did a webinar with Florida Legal Services on Medicaid and EPSDT. That was done in August, and it's available on the Florida Legal Services YouTube channel. So a whole hour and a half webinar that goes into the details about accessing Medicaid for kids under 21. No, there are not any current questions.
Okay. And I will say that was a great training. It was such a great training, because I think people forget about APSDT all the time. So, what is your experience with getting CBHA's recommendations implemented? I'm excited to see what the results are on this one. Although I'm noticing I'm saying that about all of them. What I was most excited about was really about how much it cost, and then also about the staffings.
So I'm waiting for people to answer. So I to plug
No
the
worries.
webinar that Robin just mentioned. I actually dropped the playlist that we have. This playlist includes a lot of other webinars, but you can sort it in whatever order you want, and you're going to find all these webinars listed there as well. So we have about 27 answers, and this is a short answer. So let's go ahead and
Mm,
end the poll, and about a few more coming in. So three, two, one, final chance, and ending the poll. I know people don't see the results, they only see their answer when I share it. So I'm gonna go ahead and read a few.
please.
Let me share and okay, so some answers. None. I've had not had any problems. Rarely. Better when
Mhm,
argued before and court ordered. Good mostly.
mhm.
I'm a volunteer, not very successful. None. I don't have any experience with this. It is beneficial to learn new things so that I can be prepared for it when I do have the opportunity. No experience. None. Easy to get
Okay.
court order, hard to find providers immediately available. So limited, so it keeps on and on and on. By the way, I'm going to try to get a report of all these amazing answers, and I'm going to drop them into the materials. So if you're curious as to what other people are saying, I'll do my best to share this as a cheat or materials in the materials folder that I'll share again later.
Oh, that would be awesome. The nerd in me is would be really excited to see all of what folks wrote in there. And I'll mention this kind of, as before we started this webinar and I was talking to Robin about it, like originally when I first started my EJW fellowship, part of what I needed to figure out was which children had developmental disabilities, here in my local circuit. And we decided as a team that the best way was for me to review every single CBHA that came in. And back then, if you can believe it, the CBHA, the CBC would send them all to me, all of them. I'd get batches of 10, 20, 15, 20 at a time. Obviously, all for kids that my organization was working with. And so I got to spend a lot of time just reviewing the recommendations. And this is how I identified children. This is how I initially identified. I usually had about 300 kids on my kids that I was working with that we were trying to confirm if they had developmental disabilities or that we had already identified for them. And so for me, the CBHA practice was just very routine. I got them, I reviewed them, I got them to the right spot, I made sure we had recommendations followed. Um, so, uh, so I guess I was spoiled that way, right? The CDC just sent them to me directly. I reviewed them for every single child in our organization, and I got really comfortable with working within the CBHA world to get kids, that initial push for what they needed. So let's talk a little bit about subsequent CBHAs, because I think this is a really useful tool that people don't realize, right? So a child gets an initial CBHA, they come into care, and I don't know if you realize this, but a request can be submitted annually for an updated one. And specifically, they'll only reimburse for once during the fiscal year. So July 1st to June 30th. So it'll depend on when you got the initial one. So here's when I've used them. I've requested them when there have been a lot of changes. So for example, you know how I mentioned that the CBHA will talk about reactions to patterns of placement changes. So sometimes we've had, a child in care for a number of years, which I hope is not the case, but we know is the case, and requested an updated CBHA to see what recommendations there are, what are we missing, just having like a fresh set of eyes help us figure out what we might need. I will also say I have seen this utilized when, as someone asked before about providing CBHAs for a prospective adopted family, I have seen one requested specifically for that purpose. So the child is available for adoption. There have been a lot of things going on, and so I have seen subsequent CBHAs completed uh, again, to provide to the adoptive family, the prospective adoptive family or number of families, and just to get like a really good sense of what services this child might need. I don't necessarily think it's something that needs to be done every year just to have it done. But there may be situations where it's warranted and appropriate to do them on an annual basis, right? It's all going to be, the attorney answer, it depends. It's going to depend, but I can see how it would be useful in certain situations. But I think for the case that I saw it used, the last one I'm thinking about, I think the child had been in care about 4 years, was now available for adoption. And we wanted to make sure before we started working with prospective families that we had a really good sense of, any challenges or any sort of new services that we might want to implement. All right, and here we are to I guess, the official Q&A, but we've been doing them throughout. Robin, I don't know if there are any other questions.
Not presently, I think. Um,
Okay. Okay.
did
Let's
great.
see. All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just so you guys have, so you know what are in the handouts, we've got the redacted CBHA for the two siblings. I swear I've read it till my eyes were pretty much bleeding to make sure everything was fully redacted. So it should be, but I did want you to see the comparison between a younger child, what it'll look like, and a child over 6. And we included the operating procedure again, the Florida Admin Code for you, the Medicaid handbook again, the correct one. And the CBHA referral form, which is part of the Medicaid handbook, but just to make things easier, just so you could kind of see what that looks like, we included that as well. And that brings
Ericka,
us to the
we did
end.
get a,
Yes, ma'am.
we did get a question. What do you suggest we do if our client doesn't want a new CBHA?
Interesting. So I assume the youth does not want an additional CBHA. I mean, I would probably fight it in court, but I don't think I've ever grappled with this before. What do you think, Robin?
Um, well, I think that's where the role of being a counselor to the client is to explain, yeah, it's painful to have your whole past laid open and have a stranger write all that about you. But if there's a reason that you think could benefit the young person, then hopefully you could get them to get to a place of an agreement. But if you're I don't know what your role is, but if you're the child's attorney, at the end of the day, if you can't get your client to agree, then you have to respect their decision. And, um, it is pretty intense to have all that written about you. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. And Jorge, there's a question about saving the webinar chat. I think you probably will try to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
I
it,
should be able on my end. I should be able to pull it up. It's not. I can't promise it's going to be the easiest to read because it comes out. It's not like a Word document or a PDF. It's just like a text document with a lot. But everything that is sent in the chat to everyone, it's listed there. So I'll make sure to include it in the chat in the materials as well. So if you click on the link that I dropped for the materials, you will see everything, the slides that Ericka used, and all the documents that Ericka mentioned. The chat is not there, but I will be shortly after the webinar is wrapped up and I'm processing everything. I'll make sure to drop the chat in there as well. I know the
okay.
Q&A, I can also generate a report for those that were submitted there. So I'll try to submit that report in there where it shows the questions that came in and the answers. And hopefully I can pull all those results from the questions and the polls that were answered as well because they were really interesting. So I'll try to include those in there as well.
Yeah, and there just a note just came across that there are very rarely recommendations for hearing and vision tests for kids with behavioral issues, and that is an unrecognized problem. I mean, that's a really good point.
I think that it's really important, and not only that, Robin, but well, what's interesting is though that if a child's going to get, let's say, IQ test or anything in that world, and I hate to keep relating it to the world that I spent a lot of time practicing in, but that was one of the requirements, right? A requirement was for a vision test and a hearing test. So I find that interesting that you're right. Um, I don't think I've seen that in a recommendation. That's a really good point. That's fascinating. That is a fascinating point. I didn't know if there were any other questions. but I,
All right. Well, we're waiting for questions just in case some of them come in. I'm gonna start dropping some of the CLE information.
please.
Uh, the CLE code for the attorneys that need this, it's 2515012N. So if you need a certificate, I think I saw a few emails already starting to come in. Start sending those emails. If for whatever reason I miss out, let's say within 24 hours I haven't sent you an email, feel free to bother me as much as you like because sometimes I'm just trying to do them all at once and I may miss one every now and then. So that's the CLE code. It was approved for two general CLE credits, two mental health and wellness CLE credits, and two juvenile law certification credits. So like a little bit of everything. This was an amazing webinar, you can tell. So I already dropped the link to the materials. I mentioned the materials. And again, that YouTube link that I dropped in there, that's a playlist that is specific to child welfare webinars. So you're going to find the most recent webinars, but also a lot of older webinars on our YouTube page. We have a lot of other webinars. I just don't want to bombard you with a list of 100 webinars, but feel free to explore and find other webinars and other topics that you may be interested in. So the next webinar for this series is happening December 17th. So I'm going to drop the link to register there, but don't worry, miss it in the chat. I will include this link for the registration as part of the email that goes out. It will also be included in other promotional materials that we send out. So, whenever I send out these emails, you will notice that we'll include information for Florida Children's First and for Florida Legal Services and for PILS. I include all the social media accounts. So, if you haven't followed any of these organizations, make sure to follow all of those social media accounts so we can share all this great information. So, I'm gonna take a look. I want to thank both Ericka and Robin because this was an amazing presentation. I learned a lot today, Ericka. So you did an amazing job. Robin, thank you for monitoring the chat. You're amazing at it. And every time I will have to say the same thing. I don't know how you do it, but you are watching that chat like a hawk, and it's just you answer everything super quickly. So thank you so
Yep.
much for providing that support. All right. So I see a lot of thank yous in the chat. Thank you again,
Awesome.
Ericka and Robin. If for whatever reason we missed any questions, I will also include our contact information. Feel free to send
Please.
us any questions that we may have missed, and we'll do our best to answer them. So, with that said, any closing statements, Ericka and Robin?
I don't know. Do you have any, Robin?
Just thank you, Erica. You did a great job.
Oh, I appreciate it. I just want to say thank you all for the work that you do. This is not an easy, area to be in, and so I'm grateful to what you do for what you do every day. And if I can ever be of assistance, if we can ever be of assistance, please do not hesitate to reach out. We are here to help. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right. Bye bye.
Take care.